Hello and welcome back to the channel. This week we're looking at the Class 31s in our BR Blue series. The Class 31, very common around the West Midlands during my time at Saltley, and after the 25s went even more so. The Saltley Bank Pilot Trip 57 was a particular regular 31 duty, as were many of the local trips around Washwood Heath and the Saltley area. One regular train that used to provide 31s coming onto the shed in pairs were the oil trains from the Immingham refineries into Kingsbury, and they'd leave their heavy oil trains and run light to Saltley. And then once on Saltley, they were very often stolen because the London Midland had such a power shortage on many occasions, and the empty tanks going back to the north only required a single 31 as they were empty, which of course left the eastern region short of motive power. And if you did that every day of the week, we were not very popular at all with the guys up in the eastern region power control. So look out later in the video for an actual example of this very story. Anyway, enjoy the 31s. Please like, share, subscribe, hit that notification bell, and enjoy the video. The story of Britain's railways in the 20th century is often told in terms of giants: the mighty steam Pacifics, the sleek Deltics, the thunderous Class 50s. But there is another story too, one of the unsung heroes, the machines that rarely stole the headlines, yet worked day after day, keeping the network moving. Among them, none had a longer or more versatile career than the British Rail Class 31 diesel electric locomotive. In this video, we'll explore the entire life of the Class 31 from its troubled birth in the late 1950s through to its transformation in the 1970s to its slow fade from the national network and its second life in preservation. We'll look at the technology under the skin, the crews who drove them and the passengers who rode behind them, the railway society that grew up around them. This is more than a story about a locomotive, it's the story of Britain's changing railway, from steam to diesel, from national pride to corporate pragmatism, from British Rail to privatisation, and through it all the Class 31 remained unassuming, adaptable and enduring. To understand the Class 31, we need to step back into the mid-1950s. Britain's railways, still largely powered by steam, were under pressure. The Second World War had left infrastructure and rolling stock worn out. Road transport was growing rapidly, and British Railways, newly nationalised, needed to modernise or face decline. The 1955 modernisation plan promised a bold future: electrification, new coaching stock, and, most significantly, a massive fleet of diesel locomotives to replace steam. But there was a problem. Britain had no large-scale diesel locomotive industry. Each region was encouraged to experiment, and manufacturers rushed to fill the gap. This produced an extraordinary variety of designs, some successful, others disastrous. The Brush Type 2, what we would later know as the Class 31, was Brush Traction's answer to the requirement for a medium power locomotive in the Type 2 category. Designed to deliver between 1,000 and 1,500 horsepower, intended as a general purpose workhorse, it could handle passenger trains, parcel and freight. The specification was solid, but the execution would be a mixed blessing. The Brush Type 2 was built at Brush Traction's works in Loughborough. The first examples rolled out in 1957. They featured a Merlese JVS 12T engine rated at 1,250 horsepower. On paper, it was a modern and efficient unit. In practice, it quickly developed a reputation for unreliability. The locomotives were built with a bow wheel arrangement, meaning two bogies with two powered axles each. They weighed around 104 tons, relatively light compared to larger locomotives, and had a top speed of 80 miles per hour. Their appearance was distinctive. Early examples had what enthusiasts called skinhead cabs, with a flat front, 4 character discs and no head code box. The body sides carried a neat lime green livery with small yellow warning panels. They were modern, clean, and, compared to the grime of steam, striking. But beneath the stylish exterior lay problems. The Merlese engine, though advanced, was fragile in service. Overheating, crankshaft failures, and lubrication issues plagued the class. Maintenance staff grew weary of constant repairs. Crews, too, were unimpressed. Many saw them as underpowered compared to steam locomotives, and certainly compared to new diesel peers such as the English Electric Type 4, later known as the Class 40. Nevertheless, the Brush Type 2 was pressed into service. Allocated primarily to the eastern region, particularly depots at Stratford, March and Doncaster, they replaced steam on secondary passenger services and lighter freight. For passengers on routes from London Liverpool Street into East Anglia, the new diesels were a novelty, modern, quiet, and when they worked, smoother than the smoky tank engines they replaced. Through the 1960s, the Brush Type 2 fleet expanded, with over 260 locomotives built, yet their reputation remained mixed. The engines were too weak for heavy freight. On passenger duties, they struggled on gradients. Controllers often resorted to double heading, pairing two Class 31s together to haul trains that one was never intended to manage. They also earned a reputation for their unusual sound. The Merlese engine produced a distinctive, almost whistling tone. To railwaymen, however, the sound was often accompanied by mechanical complaints that meant yet another trip to the depot for repairs. Despite these issues, the locomotives were numerous and adaptable. They worked commuter services, weekend holiday specials, parcels trains, and engineers trains. They even occasionally deputised on more prestigious services when other motive power was short. In many ways, they embodied the spirit of the modernisation plan, ambitious, flawed, but determined to carry Britain's railways into a new age. By the late 1960s, it was clear something had to change. The Merlese engines were failing at an unsustainable rate. In a bold move, British Rail decided to re-engine the entire class. The replacement was the English Electric 12 SVT, a proven power unit already in use on the Class 37. With 1,470 horsepower, it was more reliable, smoother, and gave the locomotive a new lease of life. The work began in 1965 and continued into the early 1970s, eventually covering the entire fleet. The transformation was dramatic. Crews immediately noticed the difference. The English electric engine had a deep, throaty roar, replacing the Merlese high-pitched whistle. Reliability improved, though the locomotives remained somewhat underpowered compared to larger classes. At the same time, modifications created new subclasses. The original locomotives became the 31s, the standard fleet were 31-1s, a key group, the 31-4s, were fitted with electric train heating, ETH, which made them indispensable for passenger services. This was crucial. As steam heating was phased out in the 1970s, many diesel classes lacked the equipment to heat carriages electrically. The Class 31-4s filled that gap, becoming mainstays on cross-country passenger trains, particularly in East Anglia and the Midlands. They are also useful for moving empty coaching stock into London termini from nearby depots. For the first time in their careers, the Class 31s became respected as dependable, versatile locomotives. They had moved from problematic newcomers to reliable, mid-range performers, and for many drivers, they became a familiar and trusted tool. To appreciate the Class 31, we have to look at the work they actually did day after day. On commuter services into London, hauling rates of Mark 1 and Mark 2 coaches, and passengers would hear the distinctive growl as the train accelerated away from stations like Sheffield or Cambridge. On cross-country routes, they were regulars from Birmingham to East Anglia, and on services radiating out of London's Liverpool Street. On freight, they handled lighter trains, coal, parcels and departmental workings. Their relatively low axle load made them suitable for secondary routes, with weaker track where larger locomotives were prohibited. This versatility made them invaluable. For railway staff, the Class 31 was a mixed bag. Drivers appreciated the reliability of the re-engined fleet, but they're never anyone's favourite. Compared to the power of a Class 47 or the glamour of a Deltic, a 31 was a workaday, functional, ordinary. But ordinary was exactly what British Rail needed. A dependable fleet of mid-range locomotives able to cover gaps, step in for others, and keep the network running. The Class 31 was, in essence, the railway's insurance policy. As British Rail evolved through the 1970s and 1980s, the Class 31s evolved too. Liveries changed with the times, from green to all over BR blue, then into sector liveries like Rail Freight Grey, Intercity, regional railways blue, and finally the yellow and grey departmental Dutch livery. Each change told a story. In BR Blue they were the face of corporate British Rail. In Rail Freight Grey they became part of the drive to modernise. In Regional Railways Blue they carried passengers under a bold, new brand. By the late 1980s the fleet was ageing. More powerful locomotives were taking over express passenger work. The Class 31s were increasingly relegated to secondary services and departmental duties. Yet they hung on, stubbornly useful, always available. The 1990s brought the end game. With the rise of multiple units and new locomotives like the Class 66, the Class 31s were becoming obsolete. Passenger duties dwindled, many were stored, withdrawn or scrapped. Yet a surprising number lingered. Some were kept on for engineers' trains, others for test trains. Their reliability and relatively simple design made them ideal for non-revenue earning duties where speed and power were less critical. The last regular passenger service behind Class 31s ran in the early 2000s. After more than 4 decades of service, the Workhorse was finally retiring. Fortunately, many Class 31s escaped the cutter's torch. Over 25 were preserved, spread across heritage railways from the Severn Valley to the East Lancashire, from the Great Central to the Mid-Norfolk. On preserved lines they remain popular. The growl of the English electric engine, the distinctive cab shape, the nostalgic blue or green liveries all evoke memories of an era when British Rail's blue locomotives dominated the network. Railway enthusiasts often call them goyles. For those who work with them, they are remembered with affection, not glamorous, not powerful, but dependable. In many ways, the Class 31 symbolises the modernisation plan itself. Flawed at first, improved through experience, and ultimately a survivor. They may not have been the stars of the railway, but without them, countless services would have gone unworked. So, what is the legacy of the Class 31? It is the legacy of a locomotive that quietly did its job for nearly 50 years. A machine that bridged the gap between steam and the modern railway. A chameleon that wore every livery from Brunswick green to Dutch grey. A survivor that endured setbacks, adapted, and proved itself indispensable. When we look back at the glamour of the railway's past, it's easy to focus on the icons, but the real story of the railway is told by the workhorses, the unsung heroes that did the everyday jobs. The Class 31 was one of those. Today, preserved examples continue to haul trains on heritage lines, delighting enthusiasts and educating new generations. They remind us that history is not only written by the stars, but by the quiet workers who kept the wheels turning. The Class 31 may never have been famous, but it was faithful, and its quiet way, it was extraordinary. Now, if you're a regular viewer to this channel, you'll know that there's normally a Saltley logbook entry at the end, and this video will be no exception. But I thought I'd add an extra little page for this particular image, which relates to the story I told at the very beginning of the video. This image, or the 2 images, show 31205 and 31181 on Saltley Depot on the 10th of June. And if we look at the logbook image, you'll see there's the train they came off, 6M57, probably from Kingsbury at 15:45. And that is exactly the type of loco move that I was talking about in my little tale at the start of this video. So once again we find ourselves with a few extra images where there's no commentary to run alongside. So here's a little bit of light music for you to listen to while you're looking at the last few images before we get to the main Saltley logbook feature and the end of the video. So now it's time to take a look at the Saltley Loco Shed logbooks, this time from 1985, and we're uploading this video on the 11th of October. So here is the book for that day 40 years ago. One image that covers the period from 10:40 on the 10th of October right through to just before midnight on the 11th of October. Again, a pretty standard day for Saltley, and I think I've counted 14 different Class 31s coming on and off Saltley on that day. So do enjoy perusing through that image. Thanks again for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you can be informed when we have our next video upload.